Welcome to Not Quite Right. My name's Ed.
And I'm Amanda.
On today's show, we will be talking about the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, a movie which Amanda loves. Now, Amanda, have you ever wondered what you would sound like if you'd been born in America?
I had not wondered that. Are you gonna?
Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about ChatGPT, and since then I've been going down a rabbit hole of AI apps, and there are lots of great ones, but this one from a site called 11 Labs stood out. What it does is it trains itself on an audio sample and creates a model for your voice so you can get it to say whatever you want.
God,
and
did you break it?
I just happen to have several hours of your voice and my voice lying around.
All right.
So I've got a couple of samples.
All right.
But the limitation is it only really does American accents.
Okay.
So I'll play yours.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair.
Wow.
Isn't it weird?
Oh, that is weird.
Yeah, it definitely has like the tone of your voice,
Yeah,
but
there's something there.
sounding completely different. So
All
anyway,
right, let's hear you.
well, here's the weird thing. Even though the website says it only really works with North American accents, my one came out weirdly British. And I'm not sure why. So I thought I would get it to read a classic piece of British literature.
Oh, dear.
My penis was oscillating between extremely sensitive and borderline traumatised. The last place I wanted to be was Frostnipistan. I've been trying some home remedies, including one recommended by a friend. She'd urged me to apply Elizabeth Arden cream. My mum used that on her lips. You want me to put that on my todger? It works, Harry. Trust me. I found a tube, and the minute I opened it, the smell transported me through time. I felt as if my mother was right there in the room. Then I took a smidge and applied it down there.
That sounds like, do you know what? That sounds like you actually read that and put on a British accent.
Yes. Do you know what that was?
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
So you're familiar with the Prince Harry autobiography?
Oh, God. Just that part of it, though. Like nothing else from it.
I think that's the most entertaining part.
Most horrifying part. I have absolutely no intention of reading that book. What about you?
I have no intention of reading the book, but I was definitely fascinated by what I was hearing.
Yeah, what I will say about Spare is the title is epic. I don't think there's ever been a better title for a book
good
ever.
title. It's a good title for the second in line to the throne, and also for a bowler who's not very good.
Oh, it's not too bad, a Spare. It could be worse. I don't know. I do get a bit of FOMO. You know what I mean? Like everybody's reading it and you think, oh, I just want to know for myself, even to know, for example, how bad it is, just to be able to have that judgment of my own and not make assumptions about it without actually knowing. But at the same time, the whole Harry and Meghan thing, like I just don't want a bar of it. I do not care.
Yeah.
And you just feel like you're feeding the beast.
I'm weirdly interested in the royal family for some reason. Like I'm interested
I think anybody who's interested in the royal family is weirdly interested in the royal family.
But I'm not interested in Harry or the Meghan controversy, and I don't even understand what it's about. Like I watched The Crown. I'm into that.
Yeah, right. I want to see like season 14 of The Crown where there's oscillating penises and Nazi uniforms. So I think it was a couple of episodes ago when I was having a little bit of a whinge about the fact that I'd read this book by a woman who I knew and there were some really familiar items in her book and it was very upsetting for me. Well, it's happened again. So I was telling my daughters about where I was up to with my current writing project and I was explaining one of the scenes and my eldest daughter said, oh, that sounds just like this book I'm reading right now. And later that day she brought it to me. It was literally the exact same scene. Like I can't even tell you how similar these two scenes were. And now I've banned the book in our house.
Of course, that's the logical thing to do.
It's gotten thrown straight in the bin. But like, what are the odds? Come on. I know everybody has this experience and there's no original thoughts, but it was identical. It was amazing. I just want to state for the record that I did not steal the idea. Well, I did steal the idea, but not from them, okay? From someone else.
Do you have a listening? Is it Google in your house? Do you have a listening device that is just
Ooh.
like picking up all these great
Yeah,
ideas?
maybe. That's where all these ghostwriters are getting all their ideas. They're just logging into Google and like
Maybe.
listening in. Do you know what's funny though? To segue into our little chat about the movie that we're about to talk about, which I think is one of the most original things I've seen in a very long time, and it's part of why I love it so much. And I was reading about the writers of that movie who said that they were having a real hard time just before it was released because they were seeing all their ideas elsewhere, and in particular in season 2 of Rick and Morty, apparently.
Right.
And they had to stop watching it because it was so similar. And they're like, all of our ideas are in this series. What are we going to do? And yet, I mean, and I haven't watched Rick and Morty, so I can't comment on that specifically. But I can say that when I saw the movie, it just felt incredibly original. So
I think it's unavoidable. Like, whatever. There's similarities. I don't think it matters. I always think about Hunger Games.
Mm-hmm.
There was a movie called Battle Royale, a Japanese movie that came out, I think, about 8 years before
right.
the Hunger Games, that is basically the same thing. Like
Wow.
a group of high school kids get drafted to go into onto an island and they have to kill each other. It's the
Yeah.
last person standing. And that came out years before.
Yeah.
And what can you do?
Yeah, you can't let it hold you back because you'd never write anything, would you?
Well, just because something has been written before you, it doesn't mean that you've just taken that idea and repackaged that idea. It just happens to have been already written.
An idea that you share.
You still had the idea and
Yeah.
you still wrote the idea.
And to be fair, I actually set out to write this book very intentionally copying the format of the Goonies. So I don't know why I'm even complaining that I'm finding my ideas elsewhere when I'm very much riffing off something intentionally. So I entered this microfiction competition, the New York City Midnight one. We talked about it. And part of the New York City Midnight competition is a forum where you can share your writing with the other contestants and comment on each other's work and share thoughts. And this guy who was in my group, I believe, posted his story, and it was very, very similar to the book A Man Called Ove, to the point where, it wasn't plagiarism in the sense that he didn't copy the words of the story. It was just the story itself.
In a short
form, yeah. So yeah, he didn't steal the words. It's just the tone of it, the actual plot of it, and everything that happens. The characterization of this man, spoiler alert, but the intention to kill himself and the way that he does that is all the same. And I was kind of, we've just been talking about ideas being shared and, you should never feel like you can't have the same idea as someone else. But to me, I was a bit shocked. I just felt really like, that's going a bit far. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know where the line is because, like I said, it's not like he copied the text of the book. It's more just that it felt like he'd read the book or seen the movie and then just completely taken that and written it as his own thing. So I don't know. I felt like it crossed the line, but at the same time, there's no sort of argument you could make where he had technically stolen anything from anybody.
I don't know if it's even a question of like stealing ideas, because ideas are not owned by someone but also just taking something that has some sort of emotional value and you can just kind of draw on that and condense it, and then that it's going to work to some degree. That is definitely cheating, I think.
But that's what it was. I guess it felt like cheating, because it wasn't taking new characters and putting them in the same situation. It was taking the same character, putting the same character in the same situation. And the name even started with O as well, which is funny because there's the book A Man Called Ove. There's the American movie A Man Called Otto, starring Tom Hanks. So again, it's the O names. And so it just felt like a continuation of that.
Yeah.
Where it's not even trying to hide it. And it was well written. And this guy is clearly an excellent writer, because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to pull off what he did in such a short, it's only 250 words, to have such an emotional response. And a lot of the responses on the forum were, wow, you're definitely going to win with this because this is so amazing. And it was well written, but that's, I guess, what bothered me, because you're taking someone else's idea and not even really making it your own. It's almost like paraphrasing. Do you know what I mean? Like you do an assignment for school and you go on Wikipedia and then you just change the words around, get out the thesaurus and hope that no one notices that you've taken the first 4 paragraphs off Wikipedia. That's what it felt like. And to me, that's going too far. But,
Did he win?
Well, we don't have the results yet. And I guess that's the thing. It's sort of I think it'll bother me, and I suspect he will get through because it was well written. But I think it will bother me because I'll just feel like, well, that wasn't really you.
Like, you just never know. It could be some completely subconscious thing.
And that's the
where
thing, it
he's
could.
just like, oh, this sounds good, but they can't really place where they've heard the story before. Maybe they read the book like 15 years
they've
ago or
absorbed
something.
it and not really actively.
And if someone mentioned it to them, they go, oh, no, you're right.
You're right. Whoops. But the interesting thing was too that on the forum, a lot of people were making this comparison. He wasn't actually replying to anyone.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like, like you're not addressing the elephant in the room kind of thing. And I wondered about that too. Like, well, why aren't you even responding to that? And yet he was responding to the ones who were saying how great he was and how well written it was. So it reminds
Alternative
me.
theory, maybe he is the author of A Man Called O, and he's just got one idea.
One
and
trick
this
pony.
is like...
It reminds me of my most hated book in the whole world. And I do have what you might call an irrational hatred of this book, but it's Do Not Open This Book by Andy Lee. Mm-hmm. It's a kid's book. It's a picture book. It's now a series of like 800 bloody books, and it's a complete ripoff of an old golden book that we had as children. I think it was There's a Monster at the End of This Book, and it's a Sesame Street one featuring Grover. I was bothered when I saw the book for the first time because to me it was absolute straight ripoff and also very poorly done. And also, you know, I have a little bit of bias against celebrity authors anyway. But I looked into it and he claims that he's never ever seen that other book. And I just can't believe that would be the case. But anyway, like you say, maybe he did and absorbed it somewhere in his childhood, or maybe he had the idea completely independently. I did hear about these dudes in some remote part of the world who invented the windmill independently, had never
But that
heard
happens.
of. Yeah, exactly.
There are only so many ideas to go around. Yeah.
Is there?
I mean, there's a limited number of things and to talk about and to
Is
write
there?
about. Yeah.
Isn't it infinite? And don't we say the universe is infinite anyway? No. But it's always growing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Expanding, I should
It's
say.
always expanding. But it has a limit.
Yeah, but you can't think all those ideas quick enough to catch up with the expansion
But
of the
what
universe.
ideas are you talking about? It's not like there are ideas that are on the edge of the universe that you can go.
The celebrity authors are out there just cutting edge of the actual
launching
universe.
rockets to the edge of the universe to find these great ideas.
And then it turns out it's like pretty similar to an idea we had already. So I heard that Matthew McConaughey is releasing a children's book, and I can't tell you how much this fills me with rage.
I think once you get a certain level of celebrity and money,
It's just expected.
you can pursue your dreams.
Yeah, we're not allowed to.
Yeah.
but
That's the time to become a writer because, like, it's hard to make money being a writer.
usually.
But if you already have the money, then why not?
It's true. And I mean, if you're so bored with your perfect life, I think what bugs me about celebrity authors is that they're not really following their dreams, are they? They're just doing it because they can. They haven't had this passion of writing a children's book. Do you know what he literally said? He said, I just woke up at 2 a.m. and this thought occurred to me and I decided I'd write a children's book. Yeah, righto. Like, that's not how it works. Like, it is for him. Everything just works when you're Matthew McConaughey.
You don't like Matthew McConaughey?
Oh, I
Do you
despise
like? I don't know
him.
anything about. Like, I've never
Like, not personally,
seen
I
an
haven't met him.
interview with him or anything. I don't know what he's like. But his
he's
movies, you don't
obnoxious.
like him?
No. I mean, I can watch his movies.
I'm just
and
going to take some notes for Get Wrecked.
It's not these acting skills that I have an issue with. It's his raging narcissism. He's just, he's a walking red flag. No. Bring back Brad Renfro. Reanimate Brad Renfro.
Bring that start petition. Get this shit happening.
But yes, I'm just bitter. I'm bitter Betty about the idea that, like I said, it's not that these celebrity authors are pursuing their passion and dream. If they were, I'd have full respect for them. They're just doing it because they can. And they're just going to make money off it anyway. And it's often terrible is the other thing. And they still make money off it. And then on top of being terrible, they didn't even write it half the time. They just had the brain fart and then paid someone to like turn it into something. And so that package together is just offensive. We know how hard people work to break into the industry. And so it's just a slap in the face to all these talented authors out there who don't get a look in because they're nobody, but who actually have a wonderful story to tell. But no one will ever know because no one picks their book up.
On the other hand, though, he did give a writer a job. Someone had to write the book.
That's true. That's true. I mean, Ando's out there giving lots of writers jobs.
Are you telling me he doesn't write Wolf Girl?
Oh, he doesn't. Are you telling me Ando doesn't write 45 books a year? What? On top of painting celebrities? On top of. Look, he has reluctantly admitted that he uses ghostwriters. And I think as much as pretty obvious if you sort of look at what he's churning out. And I'm not a big fan of ghostwriters. They have their place. And full disclosure, Anne M. Martin used many ghostwriters to produce The Babysitter's Club. She certainly wasn't churning out 60 books a year either. I think she said she wrote about 60 of the entire series, which is quite a lot actually. But there are other authors out there who are really working hard and producing.
It's the nature of our society.
It's a
People
plague.
will pay money for what they know, for a name.
Yeah.
You know?
Andy Lee. Ugh.
I think it's just for a lot of celebrities, it's just the next thing that they do. Like,
True.
what do? You've been in some movies, you've had a TV show, you've done some stand-up comedy. What else is there? Like,
What else
a
is
book?
there to life?
Just,
I mean, you could just sit down quietly for 5 minutes.
I guess you don't have to always be in the spotlight. That's one option.
I don't think that is an option for Matthew McConaughey, not being in the spotlight.
Jeez.
I know. Look, I've got
Matthew
a little
McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. Yeah, I am. I admit it. Who wants to join my club? And I admit that this is coming from a place of jealousy, right? I do admit that. It's the publishers, I think, that I have an issue with, who are throwing their money at these things. And it is just a capitalist thing, right? Like, the idea of producing multiple Marvel movies or Shrek 45 or whatever, that we just know it's going to make cash, so we'll do it with no question about whether we should do it or whether we're like contributing to society by doing it or whether we're actually becoming part of the problem.
Yeah. I think the problem is that life is unfair. And I was watching an interview with the woman, I guess I don't know how old she is now, who plays 11 in Stranger Things. Recall her name?
Millie Bobby
Brown. The question was, how did Millie Bobby Brown become an actor? And she was like, oh, I was just bored one day and I went to an audition and now I'm a star. I mean, that's also a kick in the face to many actors who take their profession seriously and study and work on it. And
at least she's talented.
It's not really fair, is it?
It's not. It's not fair at all. I mean, there is this whole thing in Hollywood at the moment about the Nepo babies, right? The beneficiaries of nepotism.
That's always been a thing in Hollywood, though, hasn't it?
It's been a thing, but it's like being exposed and talked about and criticized at the moment, probably more than it ever has been. I mean, obviously we all know it's a thing, and it's a thing in all of society, not just in Hollywood. But it's just a kind of offshoot of that, isn't it? This celebrity culture, just kind of, if you're successful in one area, that you just automatically get a free pass into another.
So the success opens the door, but the talent kind of gives you an in. So, for example, I don't know if I should slag people off, but
Join the party.
Kevin Smith's daughter has been in some of Kevin Smith's movies, but she's not really like a good actor. So she hasn't been in any other movies.
Yeah, right.
But there's other people who've had the nepotism, like Drew Barrymore or
they had their foot in the door, but they made the success themselves. And I'm thinking of Ethan Hawke's daughter as well, who's in Stranger Things. She's very talented. Yeah. And there is something to be said for the family business, right? Like, if you've grown up around that and if your parents happen to be incredibly talented actors, it's not out of the question that you would inherit or learn some of that talent yourself being around it. And so that's all fine. I mean, I don't have an issue with people who are talented having an advantage and being able to use that advantage and then go on to success. It's more these people who aren't talented, who just wake up with a brain fart and by virtue of their existing notoriety, they just get a free pass to the front of the line. That's what bothers me. It's like, sure, we know you've got your name, great. People know that you're going to be able to sell books, for example, just because of the name on the cover, great, but make it good.
Yeah.
And write it yourself.
Yeah.
I was in the library a little while back and I saw this series of books that was supposedly written by Australian NRL players. And I cannot stress enough how unlikely that is. I don't know. Is there an argument that you're now bringing in a new generation of young boys. I'm sure that's the target audience of that, by having this picture on the front cover and saying, well, you think this guy's cool and he's written a book, so reading's cool.
Are you talking about fiction books written by?
Yeah.
Okay, not memoirs.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm talking kids fiction book, like series books, like football themed books, right?
This is just like the corporate world now. This is just economics. This is someone approaching these guys and saying, hey, I'll
here's
give
some
you
cash.
some money for your name, basically.
Yeah, basically.
That's
you're
what it
just
is.
selling your name.
Yeah.
Needs to be stamped out.
Yeah.
But then we'd be putting all these ghostwriters out of work, which
People would have to read real books then, written by real writers they've never heard of. How would they know what to read if the name wasn't familiar to them
You're
already?
right. There's a middle grade series marketed to boys called Zach Power. And I believe that that's all different authors, contributing to that. And I feel like I'd probably be more comfortable with something like that, where it was sort of more open.
Yeah.
As opposed to someone else taking credit for it. As an alternative, for example, if Arn Doe came to me and said, will you write the next Wolf Girl? I think I would say no.
Because he stole your idea.
Because A, he stole my idea. B, he's got his name on enough books already. But no, I think I'd want the credit for myself, and I think that's important enough to me. Yeah. Like I'm not doing it just for the joy of writing and having my writing out there. I'm doing it also because I'm putting myself out there, and it's my own creativity and my own self going on the line. And I think I'd feel very uncomfortable with someone else's name attached to that. Mm-hmm. I think that's a career, like a totally legitimate career that you can take, and that's an option that people who are comfortable doing that, by all means, but not me. I don't think it's for me.
Now it's time for Get Wrecked, the part of the show where we take turns recommending to each other books or movies that we may not have chosen for ourselves.
That's one way of putting it.
Today's recommendation comes from Amanda. It's a movie that came out last year, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. So you love the movie.
I love it. Mm-hmm. It's one of my faves of all time. So basically, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once starts out with the story of Evelyn, who is a middle-aged woman living in America as a Chinese immigrant, running a laundromat with her husband. And we're introduced to this family scene, where everything's sort of going on. They're about to get audited. The daughter's having issues. The marriage is in crisis. And that's where we start off. And then pretty quickly, things start to turn very weird. It gets incredibly bizarre, incredibly fun, I would say, but also really deep. So it's these two things working together. It's deep, but also just completely ridiculous at the same time, which is why I love it, I think.
This is a movie that I had seen, and you recommended that I give it a rewatch.
I believe I insisted.
You insisted. Mm-hmm. You tied me down, forced me. Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, toothpicks in the eyes, yeah.
So the first time I watched the movie, the first 15 minutes of the movie, I was really into it. It seemed like a pretty good arty drama, I guess. Like she's about to get served with divorce papers. She's clearly not happy with her life. This is kind of an interesting setup. Let's see where it goes. And about 15 minutes in, it takes a bit of a turn.
Just a little bit.
Into multiple universes, which is something I can get behind. Like I enjoy movies that go down that path. But there was something about it just at that moment, the way that I expected one thing and got another thing. And then there were fight scenes and it kind of got a little bit absurd. Mm-hmm. And I think and I think I disengaged from it a little bit watching it the first time around.
You felt like you'd been catfished is what you're saying.
Yeah, I felt like I'm watching it, but I'm not really, identifying with the characters or trying to be emotionally invested in what is going on. Mm-hmm. And so I will say the second time round, I did enjoy it a lot more.
Yeah.
Great. And good. I think I connected with it a lot more. So I could say definitely that it's a movie that I enjoyed this time around.
Yay!
Which surprised me. But it goes to show how much expectation has to do with whether you enjoy like a book or movie. And I know 100%. That a lot of books that I've read, I think if I'd read them at a different time, I would have loved them or hated them or whatever. It's just all about your state of mind in the moment a lot of the time.
Totally. It's like visiting a new country. Do you think sometimes like if you've got to be in the right frame of mind, if you have a good experience when you go traveling, then you just, oh my God, like France is amazing because, this happened and that happened. first time I went to France, I had a bad time. And so I just thought, how disappointing. France is supposed to be this romantic city. I was with my boyfriend at the time and we fought the whole time. And so I just thought, well, that's a little bit disappointing. And I think the same applies to movies. For me, if a movie's had a lot of hype and then I go in, and even if it's good but it's not amazing, it's worse than if I'd known nothing about it at all. If I hadn't had any hype, I probably would have liked it. But it's that disappointment and that kind of, the expectation versus...
I think the hype was a big factor in this because it was really hyped to be like such a great movie. And I think I had an expectation that it was going to be a little bit more serious. And it wasn't. It's not a serious movie, although some of its themes are pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, it's very deep, but not serious maybe. Like it takes some very deep themes and with a really lighthearted approach to them, I think. But yeah, I can see what you mean. And I think I probably had the advantage of going to see it at Dendy Newtown, which gives things a bit of a different vibe as well. Especially for a movie like that, I feel like seeing it in the cinema is probably a much better experience than just watching it on the small screen because there's so much going on. So do you want to just explain to our listeners?
So do I want to just...
Yeah, just
it's
summarize
easy
it.
in a sentence like... No. Basically, the idea is that every decision that you make in your life spawns a entirely separate universe. So
the multiverse theory.
Yeah. So it's based on an actual quote unquote theory that exists, and people can travel between these universes or occupy the mind of their corresponding person in this other universe. And I thought what was interesting about this idea was that the more similar the universes are, the closer you are, and the more that you can jump easily between those two universes. And when you imagine that every single thing that happens ever in history results in a new universe, you're going to have a massive amount of universes. How do you kind of jump between them? How do you find them? Rather than going to a universe where the Earth never came about and you're just floating in space, where that would be most of the universes.
There's got to be a fair few universes where you were never born.
So we're talking about minor tweaks a lot of the time, and it's packaged in this, it's centered around this question of what if, like what could my life have been if it hadn't turned out the way that it had, which is a question that everyone has.
But I think that's what's so appealing about it. It's very relatable. And I think their choice to use the wife and mother as the main protagonist in the story, I think was a really good choice because originally that wasn't the intention. It was meant to be starring Jackie Chan, and it was going to be the male lead who was experiencing all of this stuff. And it wasn't until later that they decided who was going to be acting in it that they changed it to the wife and mother. And perhaps that's why I found it more relatable too, because there is this thing, and especially I believe, either when you're getting older, but especially if you're a mother, because I think mothers start to lose their identities a little bit in a way that's probably very relatable for just about every mother out there, that the idea of what if my life hadn't turned out this way, and not in any way of like, oh, I wish I'd never had my children or anything like that, but more a case of all the things I could have done if I was not giving everything I had to my children. All the things I could have done if I hadn't like cut my life off at that point to start a family. And I think that's what's really interesting about her story is, they say at some point in the film, in the first third of the film or whatever, this is why you're the chosen one, essentially, is because you're the worst version of yourself that you could possibly be. And we see her, she's in a situation where she's unhappy in her life. She's getting audited. Her business is about to get audited and she's going to lose all this money. Her daughter has no respect for her. She's unhappy in her marriage. Her father is horribly judgmental of her. Her life just hasn't turned out in a way, like it's felt almost as if the choices have been made for her and she's sort of ended up here as opposed to designing a life that she wanted. And I think that's incredibly relatable. I think that's something, and it's quite moving to think like, okay, you can still be this like chosen one who's just sort of an undiscovered gem. So just because you're in a rut doesn't mean that you don't still have all this potential to do whatever you want, to make whatever choice now that you want to make and to redesign your life from there. I think that's what
that's a positive message.
I think the whole movie has a positive message, despite the fact, like I would call it a love letter to nihilism, right? And I believe that, existential nihilism can actually be a really positive thing. So it gets a bad rap, as being like, well, if nothing matters, then why bother? And that's what the theme that this movie really touches on, that nothing matters. And so if nothing matters, then why bother? But really, when you look at existential nihilism, the idea of nothing matters, therefore you can do whatever you want. You know, stop being restrained and constrained by society's expectations of you. Get out there and do whatever you want because it doesn't really matter. So you may as well just do what makes you happy.
So I guess that links into the whole idea of the everything bagel. So the daughter, do you remember her name? Joy. The idea behind her character is that she was kind of brought on by her parents in this exploration of all the multiple universes. She didn't exercise maybe the same restraint as they did. And there's this whole idea that if you get too connected to one of your other alternate personalities, and if you start to explore too much of your alternate selves, you can kind of fragment yourself. Which is, I think, is an interesting idea because it is also a metaphor. Like if you get hung up too much on what could have been, then you lose track of who you are and what your potential is. But so she's become this kind of villain in the show.
But you say that she's shown a lack of restraint. The story is actually that in this alpha universe, that the same mother was also her mother there.
Yes.
And pushed her beyond the brink. So it wasn't her showing a lack of restraint. It was her mother pushing her. And I think that theme too is very strong. And from what I read and from what I understand is incredibly relatable within the Chinese culture, this pushing to be the best. And so that was the idea, that she was pushing her daughter to be the best at what they call verse jumping between the universes. And so in doing so, she pushed her too far. And that's when, as you say, she's broken, basically.
Yeah. And so she's portrayed as the villain. And she represents, I guess, a view of nihilism. I guess what the movie does well is develop this logical idea of what nihilism is and where that idea comes from. And so the idea comes from her experiencing all of these different realities. She is a character that has the ability to do everything. She's done everything a million times. And so her response to this is really, I guess, a form of depression.
Yes.
And so the movie deals with this conflict or even not conflict, but counterbalance between her depression and her mother's, I don't know if it's optimism. The daughter, Joy, sees that the world has no meaning and there's no purpose. So she builds this everything bagel, basically throws everything in the world onto this bagel, and she sees that as a way of just, I'm going to get sucked into this and I'm going to cease to exist.
But I think that was another really interesting component, in much the same way of the idea of a middle-aged woman perhaps being in a rut, losing her identity when she became a mother, for example, but also this looking at depression, which is, you know, a common affliction, to look at that from a different angle. And I felt the movie really handled that very well and gave a really positive message in response to that. And I would also say, so if we're talking about nihilism, I think there's existential nihilism, which is what I think this movie's all about. Then there's moral nihilism, which is all about there's no objective good or evil. You know, in the past, religions had sort of claimed this and said that there is a real truth and there is a real wrong and a real right, and everybody must do it this way or they're wrong. And moral nihilism says, well, no, that's garbage. There is no objective right or wrong. That's where you can get into dangerous territory of, well, let's go commit homicide then because there's nothing wrong with it. But if we're talking existential nihilism, the idea there is that there's no meaning to life. There is no intrinsic meaning. The only meaning is what we create. And you can get dark with that too if you want, but I'm a big fan of it, and I believe actually what it does mean is you get to choose what the meaning is. And that's really wonderful, particularly for people who are outside of social norms, who are wanting to go a different way. That's okay. You can do that because you're creating your own meaning. You bring your own values to every situation. And as long as you're acting in accordance with your own values, you will be happy. And so I guess that's the counterpoint to this, the depression that can come from thinking, okay, there's no meaning to anything. There's no objective meaning to life. So therefore nothing matters. And therefore what's the point of having love, or what's the point of having a family? What's the point of striving? Because it really doesn't matter. We're all just going to die anyway.
Yeah.
That's the depressive look on it. But the counterpoint, which is what the movie comes back with, is basically like nothing matters, therefore all that matters is joy. All that matters is happiness. All that matters is bringing happiness to yourself and others around you. And in that way, striving becomes meaningful again because you're striving to what's important to you. You're striving to what brings you or the ones that you love more joy. And I think that, it's no accident that they named her Joy.
Yeah.
And in the end, of this movie, love wins. And I think that's probably why the movie was so popular, because it does have a really nice, wrap it all up kind of thing. Like it blows your mind and then it goes, oh, it's okay. It's okay, darling.
Yeah,
like it's all actually fine.
Yeah, that was a look. I liked Synecdoche at the end because it had that bleak ending
that's the thing.
where
I
he
don't
just dies and it's awful and that's it. You're just dragged through the mud and then you die. And I kind of liked that because it felt very honest and very it didn't try to sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
So with this movie, I felt at the end, it said, hey, if we follow this to its logical conclusion, we get to this really depressing answer. And there is a counterpoint to that, as you said, and that counterpoint is that, well, it gives you the freedom to embrace love and all the good things about life. I don't know if it really made the case strongly enough for that.
Really?
Yeah. I felt it was more like it just smoothed over that and said, oh, but don't worry about all this. Isn't it better just to be kind to each other? Which is not something I disagree with, but I think that there was room there for, I think, a stronger argument made at the end of the movie. I don't think it was
agree
really...
with you. I don't think it was all, let's just be nice to each other at all. I think what it did was it really went hard into that mother-daughter relationship as its primary point. I mean, there was a lot of other things going on, but I think we could probably say the main theme came from that mother-daughter relationship. And mother-daughter relationships are complicated.
Yeah.
And I think the movie really was honest about that complication. Like certainly you would recognise in that first part of the movie that it really is getting to that truth of this difficulty of a mother and a daughter, teenage daughter who are just not connecting. The mother's very critical. The daughter's trying to go her own way. All she's getting is criticism in response. And I think that's quite a common experience. And then to have that come full circle, it didn't sugarcoat it. They weren't perfect, happy ever after in the end.
No, I
was
think
still
what he
very
glossed
true.
over was... No, I agree with
it was very
everything.
much like, okay, we still got our issues, but we love each other. And underneath it, and I think that for many people and for many families, it's like, yeah, we've got all these issues. We can't always get along. We can't always see eye to eye. But underneath that is this love and that exists. And you can't sort of deny that it exists. And you feel it. So we can say, oh, nothing matters in the world. But there's something about love that you just feel and experience, and it's not fake, It's not just a happily ever after rubbish. It's very, very much the essence of who we are as human beings. And I think it underlines everything about what we do and why we do it. And I think that's what the movie was touching on, not just like, oh, let's wrap it all up in a little bow.
I guess it was more felt out than argued for.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of the rest of the movie was an argument in favour of nihilism, mostly on the daughter's part. And the counter argument was, yeah, but not. But it's not.
But that is the counter argument. Don't
Yeah.
you see? I don't know. Maybe I'm weird, but I feel like this is probably a common experience too, especially when I was a teenager, just going through this phase of like just having these like really deep thoughts and just getting really freaked out. Like when you start to think about like, oh my God, like what are we?
Yeah.
Where did we come from?
Yeah.
What's the point of anything? What is happening? And I used to get a bit too far down the rabbit hole and get so scared and just like it's too much. Like your brain cannot actually comprehend any sort of meaning from why we are here or what the purpose of anything is. And if you start to go too far down that track, like it will break your brain. Like it
That's
will.
true.
And so I think that the movie was actually quite accurate in that you do just have to kind of band-aid over it and say, but actually, don't you feel like there's a meaning?
Yeah.
There is something to that. Yeah. Listen to that feeling. Listen to your instinct that love is there for a reason, that we are striving for something, not just, that it's all about procreation. No, there's something else, like this need to make our mark on the world or to experience love and share love, the need to bring joy and happiness to people that we care about. Like that's an instinct that we have, and that's there for a reason. And just because we can't explain it doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah, you're right. I think I'm asking for it to be resolved in a way that it just can't be.
Like philosophers have been talking about this since the dawn of time. Like you're expecting a movie to wrap it up. It is long, I'll give you that. And sitting in a cinema watching it without a break was quite full on experience. And there is that sense too, because it's, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it is broken up into 3 parts. Everything, everywhere, and all at once. It's the 3 parts. And it takes like a solid hour and a half for the first part to finish. And then you get to the second part and you're like, oh my God, is it going to be 5 hours long? Then it's not. But it does at times, I think, feel long. And I think it probably could have been cut down in certain parts, although I'm not sure what I would have cut out.
I think you could lose some of the jokes. A few of the jokes were done a few too many times.
Yeah.
The sausage fingers. But at the same time, a few of the jokes landed with me a lot better this time around.
Yeah,
for some reason, I really enjoyed Rakakuni. I don't know what it was, but I thought that was actually hilarious.
I actually found Rakakuni much funnier on the second viewing as well. I don't know why. Oh, God, so good. But on that, okay, let's move to that. Forget the nihilism and the bloody meaning of life. It's freaking hilarious.
Yeah,
it's
it does
the
have its
most
moments.
shocking, offensive, insane sequence of events that I've seen in a cinema in my entire life and probably ever will again. It's hilarious.
And I think I was left with that feeling at the end, actually. There are some movies that you watch and you think, maybe it has its flaws or maybe there are things that could be changed. But at the end of the day, you look at it and think, well, I'm glad it exists because there's nothing really like it. And I'm really much prefer to have people try and create something that's a little bit different, that's a bit unique, than just kind of do the same thing over and over again in a predictable way.
Exactly. Let's not criticize this movie when we could be having Spider-Man 45.
Exactly.
I really appreciate how far they went with it. And I think that's part of why I love it so much. When you watch creators, artists of any type, and in this case, screenwriters, absolutely go for it. Just completely put their entire selves on the line and go really hard for something that they think is funny, that they believe in. And to watch someone pull that off, I think it's inspirational and it's incredibly rewarding, when there is so much fear in Hollywood of okay, well, we're just going to do Shrek 5 because we know that people will go and see it. And we've already got all the assets from Shrek's 1 to 4. And so we can just reuse that and it'll be cheap.
Yep.
And we know we're going to make some money off it. Great. No. Give us something original. Give viewers a little bit of respect, that they can handle something a bit different and appreciate it if it's done well. And I think, I don't know if it's laziness or the fear of investors and they just want to throw their money at something that's just going to be a quick buck. But I really do love to see these ones where they've actually taken a chance on something and it was a risk. It could have landed pretty badly. There's some incredibly offensive stuff in it that, even watching it myself, thinking, this is awful. I do not want to be watching this right now, and yet I can still have a laugh about it. I certainly won't be recommending the movie to my mother-in-law. No. But no, okay, you got to tell me, what was your favourite scene?
I actually like the first scene when Joy turned up and she started fighting the police officers.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was very creative, the way that was choreographed and scripted.
The costumes were
the
costumes were amazing.
and just the absurdity of all of the fights, and the guy was upside down, and then at one point her and her mother were fighting and they turned into drawings. And look, it was very creative. I think that was probably the scene that stood out to me as just being a real expression of the movie's creativity.
I would have to say my scene that I think is the best expression of the movie's creativity would be the rock scene. Yep. I think the rock scene is one of the most understated, hilarious scenes of any movie ever. I was in tears. I also have to point out that I love the Goonies references and was instantly in love with the movie as soon as I realized that Data was starring in it. That's just You've sold me instantly.
All right, so I guess it's my turn to give some recommendations to you.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Well, I've got something a little bit different today.
Oh, you say that every
And-
time.
No,
That usually means it's going to be painful.
Well, no. So the last couple of times I acknowledge have been a little bit painful. And what I don't want to do is just destroy any kind of hope and optimism that you have and grind you down. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I thought today I'd do
Clockwork Orange.
So I thought what I'd do is give you a choice. So
Ooh,
it's going to be like a mystery box.
Okay.
Or like one of those game shows where you have to choose what's behind each door.
All right. Love a game show.
Okay. Behind door number 1 is something serious.
Okay.
So something, like what maybe I've recommended before.
Are we talking film, book? What are we talking?
These are all 3 films.
Okay.
So number 1 is if you're in the mood to kind of get a little bit destroyed.
Okay.
Okay. Number 2 is something light and funny, but also very different. Not a whole lot of analysis there, just kind of something to enjoy. And the third, behind door number 3, something romantic.
Okay.
So all 3 of these movies are something I would recommend. And in fact, much like some of the choices we make in life, it doesn't really matter what you choose because I'm going to recommend the other ones to you later.
All right. I'm going to have to go door number 2. Thanks, Eddie.
Okay. Door number 2. All right. So behind door number 2 is... So it's a movie called Greener Grass. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Have you seen it?
No.
All right. It's a movie from 2019. And if any of our listeners want to follow along, I believe you can find it, looks like Apple TV, Amazon, Google Play, or YouTube has it. But look, this is a movie from a couple of years ago. It has a really interesting and different sense of humour. It is a comedy.
I'm getting Black Hole Sun vibes from that movie poster there.
Yeah, it's funny. It's very different. Some people might not gel with the style of comedy. It's definitely not conventional, but I recommend it, and I think it's probably underrated.
All right. I love a good
and flew
underrated.
under the radar, so
Okay. I'm looking forward to it.
enjoy.
Looks completely ridiculous.
It is completely ridiculous.
Great.
And that takes us to the end of another glorious episode. Amanda, if our listeners have any questions or feedback or want to contact us, how can they do it?
You can email us at notquiterightpodcast@gmail.com, or you can contact us at Instagram at notquiterightpodcast, or on Twitter at NQW Podcast. And we'd love you to follow our show on your podcast platform of choice. Share it with your friends, spread the word.
And leave a review, a 5-star review, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
I don't have to say it. Come on. But we'd really appreciate it.
That'd be great. Thanks, guys.
And thanks for listening. Until next time, right on.
Right on.
Something doesn't seem quite right.
My penis was oscillating between extremely sensitive and borderline traumatized. The last place I wanted to be was Frostnipistan. I'd been trying some home remedies, including one recommended by a friend. She'd urged me to apply Elizabeth Arden cream. My mum used that on her lips. You want me to put that on my Todger? It works, Harry. Trust me.
It works, Harry. Trust me. What do you think about the word Todger?
It's offensive.
It is the word that he would use, though. That's the thing.
Absolutely.
I think if you came across it in a erotic fiction,
Which you would.
would you? The word Todger?
Oh, yeah. You'd come across every possible synonym in erotic fiction, I reckon.
That one just has a weird connotation for me. Like, I just imagine some old British dude going, like, Todger.
It's not sexy. I think
No,
that's
it's not
safe
sexy
to say.
whatsoever.